Welcome to the War Room Down Under. Today we're talking about a world of contradictions. Around the world, lots of stuff is happening, it's concerning people, but when you look at it, it's just riddled with contradictions. And Nick and I are a little bit concerned. We want to talk about a few things. It's a bit of a fruit salad today, Nick.
It's a fruit salad. So many things, interesting and diverse things happening, and yet in all of them, this theme of lies, really, just a lack of respect for truth. And so people behaving in all sorts of different ways, very strategically, but not really based on a respect for facts and balance and genuine understanding and how things actually work.
Well, I said inconsistencies. You said let's call it what it is. It's lies, but it's contradictions at the very top level. Let's get into it, starting with our friends at Twitter. Mr. Musk has made his move on Twitter. The share price reached a high through the year of 75, 12-month high of 75. It went to 37 the other day from 52 about 2 weeks ago. The reason I'm talking share price is because it's an indicator of confidence and trust in a stock. And the reason it's dropped is because of general market softness overall, the markets. But in particular with Twitter, they've discovered that a lot of the so-called accounts are not in fact real. So, you know, inconsistencies.
When you say not real, there's no actual person behind it. It's just a bot.
It's a bot.
It's a bot. I think it's a bit prejudiced because you know, bots should be able to have accounts too. Eventually, Twitter will just be a virtual bot social platform for all the robots.
Well, when he did that, when he did the DD, started to dig a bit deeper into Twitter, he found that around 18 to 20% of the Twitter accounts are actually bots. So, in other words,
and I saw that on some of the accounts that get a lot of very politically sensitive feedback. I think it was the president's account in the US. 50%. More than half. More than half.
50% of Joe Biden's followers are actually bots. You'd probably have to be a bot to follow Joe Biden. But the real issue there, Nick, is that these are the people who have held themselves up as the custodians of information, the police of misinformation. And they've in fact been, as Steve Bannon called it, you'll see in a moment, fraudulent. He believes they've been fraudulent. They've actually misled the market. He said, that's fraud. These guys are going down. And so it's astonishing. The guys who have actually talked about, not talked about Biden's laptop, Wuhan, and so on. We won't list them all.
Well, and all the people they've kicked off their platform. Maybe that's why there's so many bots. They keep kicking off the real people who have real opinions.
If you're not a bot, you can't be on.
A lot of people kicked off, of course, for having unacceptable opinions. And so they really respect truth.
But they've held themselves out. They've controlled the civil conversation around the globe, and it is global, and they've said, no, you can't talk about this, you can't talk about this. By the way, we will decide what's true, what's misinformation, disinformation, and here they are, 20 to 50%. So
lying about the value of their own product.
I mean, that's a lack of transparency. It's a contradiction of fact, call it a lie, and it's fraud, corporate fraud. I mean, this is really serious. These guys could go for this. So not only will their share price go south, they might go south as well to a prison.
So focused on Twitter because obviously it's the global public square, or so say some of the folks in the conservative world that we appreciate and respect, but they should all be off Twitter. It's a scam. It's a total scam. We said this from the beginning. The lies have come out. Elon Musk said the bots, they publicly report the bots at 5%. This is what your pension fund buys the stock on, saying that the bots, the phony machines, right, that are not humans, are 5%. Elon Musk says today, I think actually it's closer to 20%, right? 20%. That is 4 times what they report. That right there is that is criminal fraud. And he says, but I really think the number's closer to 80%. 80%. So the thing fell apart today, and then they asked him, well, are you still going to buy? He says, well, yeah, I might at a lower price. Boom. Here's the beauty of it. All the destruction and hate and everything they've done in stopping the laptop from hell and the Wuhan lab and the vaccines. Think about all the 3 November. Think of every important topic of our time that this nation would not be where it is today. But those punks out there, they're all going to go to prison because they've lied and lied and lied and lied.
And at the least, it's double standards. It's one rule for you and another rule for us. And it shows that when things enter the real world for given people, often their apparent values that are all good in the abstract, suddenly they go out the window. When it's your actual value of your own stocks and your own product on your actual real genuine market,
the real stuff.
Maybe you don't have the same respect for truth.
Well, as I said, the Republicans have got standards, but the good thing about the Democrats, they've got double standards.
No.
So, so that's like a little opener. That's a contradiction. You know, over the last 2 or 3 years, the conversation around the world has been monitored, constrained, filtered by Twitter, and here we find they've actually not been good boys and girls, which leads us to our friends at the World Health Organization.
Right.
And this is the big story because just a couple of days ago, Mr. Morrison was in Darwin and talking to this, and we'll show you the clip now. This has pretty, stirred up the ants nest, this one, because here he is celebrating that he's been the vanguard of promoting this World Health Pandemic Treaty. Now, there are 192 countries set to sign this. They're meeting in Geneva in June. In America, and we'll show a few pieces of media here around this, in countries like the UK, the US, and less so Australia. Have you noticed that? Well, this is not really getting a lot of air.
It has not been getting much coverage in Australia, although I've suddenly heard about it in the last couple of days. So I guess we'll see how steeply that coverage may.
Well, I was surprised to see the Telegraph writing against it, which Sydney Telegraph. But the point about this is, as Michelle Bachmann says in the clip we'll show you in a second, this is actually a challenge to the constitutional framework of a country, the sovereignty of the framework. And what annoyed so many people about the Morrison clip in Darwin when he was pressed on this, wasn't pressed too hard, by the way, but when he was pressed, he got his little smirk on his face and then celebrated. And actually, if you watch what he does here, he actually turns it into a campaign thing, so it's a Liberal Labor thing. That's not the point. The point is, Prime Minister, why are you giving our country away to another body, the World Health Organization, funded by different parties? They're not independent. And he goes, well, I've been at the vanguard, and by the way, I got criticised. Well, so you should. So you should.
So in case anyone has actually missed the detail on this, it's fairly simple. The World Health Organization facilitating the establishment of this pandemic treaty that, as you say, close to 200 countries could be signing on to, and it would be actually giving power to the World Health Organization to adjudicate or impose different types of domestic health policies
at their discretion. At their discretion, and make the ruling on how that nation, e.g. Australia, should respond accordingly.
Right. So next time it's not, well, the federals not to blame, the states are, and the states won't be the federals to blame, not us.
It'll be who?
It's going to be the World Health Organization told us.
Which is funded by Big Pharma, Gates, and links directly to the CCP. So why would you, Mr. Morrison, or any leader, whether it's Trudeau, Macron, wherever, Ardern, why would you give your country's sovereignty to a strategic adversary? Why would you allow an external body, a party, to determine what happens within your borders should there be a pandemic, which they define, and they can say, under the amendments that have been proposed in Geneva in June, they can determine what is a pandemic and the nature of the pandemic. So we're losing it. I mean, it's insane. This is insane. And people are really, really concerned about it. And as you'll see, Mr. Morrison's quite pleased about it.
The World Health Organization meets on May 22, and on the agenda is a potential pandemic treaty which would allow WHO to direct countries in how they control pandemics. Would you consider signing up to that and handing over any controls to the organisation?
I have always been supportive right from the outset and was criticised heavily, I stress, heavily, mocked in fact by the Labor Party for saying the WHO should have those powers and those authorities to be able to go and deal with pandemic situations, because we all know what happened at the start of this pandemic. The problem is we don't know what happened at the start of this pandemic, and I was the one calling to ensure that we had an independent process to understand what happened so it couldn't be repeated. So I have been in the vanguard of those moves internationally to ensure that there is greater protection for world health, to ensure that those world health authorities can come and understand what's going on and be able to assist countries to be able to prevent the spread and outbreak of major infectious diseases. Now, we'll look at the text of all of that, but we have been amongst the countries that have been positive about these sorts of changes. Have to look closely at what the detail is in these things, as you always must. But the idea that countries can just say, no, you can't come in and have a look at a pandemic that's about to break out and actually affect the public health and the economy of the entire world, as we saw with this pandemic, then I think it's only sensible that that's an area of international cooperation that is very, very important. And I've been consistent on that. And remember, the Labor Party mocked me for saying that was
really frustrates me about this World Health Organization treaty and the way they're talking about it is, where's everyone's memory, right? Only 2 years ago, when the pandemic began, there was all of this, humming and hurrying about whether this technically is a pandemic yet or not. They spent all of their time meeting together trying to, carefully define the term pandemic, and all of their initial meetings on it were being very careful at telling all of the big countries that they shouldn't be, shouldn't allow local racism against Chinese peoples within the country.
Yeah, that was the play. It was racism.
That was their priority. Then it was kind of discovered that Tedros, who's in charge of this, was basically a China pick, and all the politics of that had happened.
No, we've forgotten about that.
We've forgotten about all of that. We've forgotten about the things that came out about his background and history. The US pulled out of the World Health Organization, said, look, there's other...
Trump pulled out.
Essentially Trump, of course, he led that and said, look, there's multiple multinational organizations that can fulfill this function. There's Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, as is easier to say.
I love it when you talk Dutch.
Thank you. and there's a whole lot of organizations that fulfill similar functions when it came to Ebola.
But now we're being backed into the garage again.
But now, no, yes, it's the one that is the kind of UN framework. And why are we forgetting?
But here's the thing. This actually started back in 2018. The planning for this started in 2018.
They gave us long enough to...
Way before the pandemic was flagged in 2020, roughly late 1920. And now they're saying they'll bring it in 2024, I think it is. So they've got 2 years to implement this. So this has been strategically mapped, calculated. And, this is no accident. This is not a collection of errors. And someone said to me the other day, when there's an outcome in politics, this is broadly we'll call this politics, nothing happens by mistake, it happens by design. The outcome is the intended outcome. Oh gosh, we've got a world pandemic organisation called WHO, and they're here to help us and to keep us safe globally. And that clip of Morrison, he talks about World Health. What the heck is World Health? Are we not concerned about Australia and Australia's health? So now we're part of this global, and this is what globalism talks about. We have a duty and a responsibility to other people, and if our sovereignty and if our welfare and our dignity is compromised, well, so be it, because we're global citizens.
Take place in Geneva, Switzerland at the World Health Assembly. They're important because they're the governing body of the World Health Organization, WHO. This authority that they would be given would impact 99.4% of all the people in the world. There are 193 nations belonging to the UN. The Biden administration is bringing amendments that would propose that all nations of the earth cede their sovereignty over national health care decisions to the WHO, the World Health Organization. So what this would mean, Steve, is that the WHO would have decision-making authority to intervene into United States government policy in any nation of the world without our permission. So, for instance, the lockdowns where you see 26 million people today locked down in Shanghai, China, they can't leave their apartments or homes. The WHO would have the authority to be able to impose that here in the United States for whatever pretext they want. They don't have to show data. They could do this. What this does, Steve, bottom line, is it creates a platform for global governance. Global governance through the WHO. This is what people need to know. It's time sensitive.
Off the other side of this election, we've got to be all over this, because I think it is just another one of these areas where the global organisation, that globalism perspective, waters down our politicians. We get more and more used to having insipid, brainless politicians who really don't understand all the details and don't think that's their job, just appealing to experts. And we're giving away our sovereignty. It bypasses democracy. My vote doesn't matter. I don't vote in the World Health Organization. I didn't even know when Tedros got appointed until the pandemic came along a few years later. So it bypasses democracy. It's making what is already a pretty weak domestic politics even weaker. And I think we really do have to oppose it.
Well, that was Michelle Bachmann's point when she was talking to Steve Bannon. And speaking of inconsistencies and contradictions, here we are in the lead up to the election. There was a rally in Warringah in Sydney, northern suburbs of Sydney. A few pretty high-profile independents, pretty passionate gathering of people at this town hall meeting, which we'll show you in a moment. And the ex-ABC journalist is emceeing the event and asking the room, should some people who are unvaccinated be asked to leave the room? So, I mean, talk about contradictions.
I'll take that as a no. So no, just so that we're very clear.
Excuse me. That man over in the blue, you're being ridiculous. You're behaving like a 5-year-old. Now, just keep it quiet. Now, Zali has raised a health issue here. I'm 4 times vaccinated. Very happy to be. And I'm just going to seek some advice on the club here about having unvaccinated people here. I'm not sure.
So here's the thing, right? Can you tell me the 38th killer of people in Australia medically?
I can.
You can?
I can.
What is it?
Yeah, COVID-19.
Oh, there you go. The 38th killer of people in Australia is COVID-19.
I've been researching that.
You've been researching. Okay, so he passes the test. What are the other 37, Nick? Heart would be in there.
Heart disease.
Yeah.
Heart disease always.
Hepatitis, tuberculosis, list them. Did that person say, oh my God, apart from the fact that transmission, all that vaccinated stuff, which we know, right? I won't bore you with that. Point is, she focused on one medical condition and said that person, without any logical science to back it up, should be asked to leave the room, but didn't talk about the other 37. So should someone with hepatitis or meningococcal or whatever be asked to leave the room? I mean, this is contradictions of logic. It's just
it's just not respecting a proper approach to truth and facts, because really it should be someone who has a background in reporting. It should be actually the type of person who in the room is presenting a balanced and sensible understanding.
Well, I made the point she's an ex-reporter of the ABC, and maybe that's why she's an ex-reporter.
Well, except I'm sure at the ABC, I mean, using the truth to shape a message rather than doing it backwards. That would
not my
be quite an
not my
acceptance.
ABC. Are you having a go at my ABC?
Right.
Going back to the Twitter thing, the fact checking, the people who were there to moderate misinformation, who fact checked her? Who fact checked that ex-journalist and say, well, that actually scientifically you can't defend that. And by the way, what about the other 37? Nobody. They clap. I mean, it's like this is a little bit crazy. And speaking of crazy, Pfizer in the US have just been approved by the FDA through a very sort of rapid process, wink, wink, for 5-11s. So Pfizer have now got their approval to give their injections to 5 because they were a bit short on profit this year, right? So they're doing it tough. But now for 5-11s, and nobody's kind of saying, well, is that relevant? Is that necessary? And what are the adverse events? Blah blah blah. They don't fact check that. And when someone dies in their sleep, no one asks the question, and they didn't recently. Someone died unfortunately in their sleep, 26-year-old, and not one article said, could it be? Might it be? Nobody's asking the questions.
The medical community is rallying around local AMA boss Michelle Atchison after the sudden death of her daughter Kaylin. Hundreds have taken to social media to express their condolences and pay tribute to the 26-year-old, who Dr Atchison says never woke up. The AMA president announced the sad news on Twitter, describing her daughter's death as utterly unexpected. Kaylin's been described by friends as compassionate, caring and beautifully generous. Her cause of death is not known.
So nobody's asking the questions of the ex-journalist, nobody's asking the questions, and yet when other people come up with information, it's misinformation.
Yeah, in fact, you're not allowed to ask the questions, and that's a problem. Because you can't actually trust the answers when you won't let people ask the questions. That's the thing, if the questions were allowed and were genuinely answered and were handled in a mature way, perhaps there would actually be a bit more trust. But at the moment, for people who want to get data about mortality and causes of mortality, like coherent data about what proportions of which age groups are getting, and a good coherent presentation of it, it's not there. Getting data really hard. And
But that's intentional. I mean, this is this contradiction. The contradiction there is, with the theme of contradictions today, is that we used to have mature conversations. We used to share information. We used to have data. Now, you're not allowed to talk about stuff. You're not allowed to argue. You're not allowed to access data. Why not?
Yeah. And look, handling that type of data is difficult. Statistics is difficult. It's very easy to make easy errors, right? Let's put it that way. But the answer to that is to have good explanations with data, presented maturely by people who are able to explain what has been seen. And that's not what we've been seeing. Instead, we're getting the immature type of communication, the talk down to you, the buzzwords. This is safe and effective. And
safe and effective.
Safe and effective, except that we know there's many ways in which it's not effective.
Define safe.
So, we don't trust it when we're spoken to like children.
No.
And we're not allowed to ask questions like adults.
But it's intentional, and there's just the contradiction. It's just such a huge topic. I get so frustrated with this, and it's not a collection of errors again. And this is the intent. How can you have informed consent? How can you, when you can't get information? You can't have informed consent, clearly.
Yeah.
So it's
and the way they involve children, the emotive thing about children, of course, the decisions for children is in the hands of their parents. You have different.
Well, it might be in the hands of WHO pretty soon. And that's the point, Well, it might be. I mean, they might say, they might send out an edict saying, boom, that's it.
With the pandemic treaty, we'll certainly see what actually.
I mean, I know there's the devil's in the detail, but that's where it's headed. Okay, talking about contradictions, we've been speaking recently, Nick, about people of conservative values and ethics with a foundation of belief, whether it's Christian or not, speaking into the civic square, being in the town hall meetings, having a voice, and actually representing their interests, right? But the word is, the separation of church and state. There's pressure on us people like that to say, no, retreat, be quiet, right? We've talked about that.
Yeah.
So here's a clip I just want to show you where a couple of guys from the US, you might recognize them, are talking about dualism. Let's take a look at that.
Get pumped when, a billionaire professes their faith and we're like, that's our God, that's our God. Yeah, that's amazing. But the moment a Christian runs for politics, like I live this, okay? So I have a little bit of authority to talk about it. Like the moment that everything else is fine. All other spaces are fine. But the moment when a Christian runs for politics, man, I had friends that I was like, these guys are going to back me, right? We talk in the back room about these issues. We're all in one accord. The moment a Christian takes a stand in politics, it's like, ooh, I don't know about that. What's he doing this for? I don't know about that, And it's like, I think it's actually demonic, man. I think that there is this thing in the church where the enemy has so messed up our churches and our theology to not allow Christians. Think about it. Say there's 7 spheres of society, right? There's only one sphere that regulates all the other spheres. We experienced that in COVID. Who controls our lives? Where you can go, when you can have church, what you can do. And if we don't have Christians represented, if we're not salt and light in the one sphere that controls all other spheres, how are we faithfully responding to the Great Commission? So, growing up as a missions kid, I just thought, well, I'm going to be a missionary in Congress. Like, honestly, that was my heart. Like the Lord sent me into closed nations before, God can send me wherever he wants to go. When I gave Jesus my yes, I told him I'll go anywhere. The greatest price I ever had to pay, my family ever had to pay, when I gave Jesus my yes to go into politics. The darkest space I've ever encountered out of any nation in the world is the space of politics. And it's because Christians are afraid to represent Jesus in that space. Anyway, that's intense, but it's true.
Well, why do you think that's the case?
I think because there's too much dualism, where we separate that. We separate politics from our faith, and it's like that's not actually the Hebraic way. All of our life, right? Jesus gets all of our life. Every space of our life. Don't bring Jesus into the ballot box. Oh yeah, bring Jesus into the ballot box. Don't bring Jesus into your politics. Yeah, bring Jesus into your politics. I mean, look at the founding fathers. You know, I mean, this is our call as Christians. And so, you know, my pushback against that is when you see like what happened last night in that Senate vote, it's impossible to be a believer and not like absolutely rise up. Go, hold on a minute. What? Every single Senate Democrat but one wants babies to die up until the moment of birth? I'm not okay with this. We got to hold the line.
So the point there is, I think made really well, you know, perhaps is this why the church is so quiet, is so silent on these matters, and people have been conditioned, almost bluffed to be quiet, you know, like we're not being quiet. That's why we're doing this, we're not being quiet. But I would call it, he calls it dualism. You know, but you had another thought on that.
Well, in my mind, what came was the word syncretism, which for people sort of familiar with the Bible in the Old Testament, a big difficulty for the Jewish nation was that they started worshipping gods that they essentially borrowed from all of the countries around them. And
so like contaminated or influenced.
That's right.
Flavored.
And empires like the Roman Empire would actually use that as a way to dilute different cultures, would actually make them borrow gods from one another, which detached them from, you know, continuing mindset of the connection between the god, the land, and the people. And as a result, that was a way that they would help them kind of subjugate, force people to worship different gods. They gave up on the Jews because they thought of the Jews as atheists because they didn't have any physical representation. So there's some interesting history there, but the word syncretism for the modern church means the same thing, really, borrowing the gods of the surrounding cultures. And so dualism, of course, is this: you've got your church life and your religion mindset, and you've got your real life, if you like, your work life, your civic life and your civic mindset. They're two different things, but of course they can't be two different things.
Well, just on that,
because one is values that feeds the other.
One of my favourite Hebrew words, when you study Hebrew, is avodah, A-V-O-D-A-H, and it means in English, and it means work and worship. You can't separate it. So when you're working, you're worshiping. If you're herding the goats, picking the grapes, whatever, you're working, but you're worshiping. So everything is integrated and holistic, and you do it unto, right? So you don't separate. There is no dualism. So dualism is in fact a misnomer or contradiction, to go with that.
Well, it's dangerous to break your life.
You can't. Well, that's what Sean's saying.
Not bring your whole self.
That's what Sean's saying. You can't do it.
Yeah.
But we bought that story, and we retreated to you know, a conservative point of passivity, and then we said, okay, that's how we'll play this game. But what we'll do will be synchronistic in the sense that we'll actually adopt things. Now, recently, there was a particular church, won't name them, who had a major conference, and they had all their church leaders getting together to talk about how they could actually run their organisations more effectively and be more relevant for society, blah, 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 as you would do in a conference. Came from multiple states, and they put up on the screen a set of values to promote to their church leaders, and the set of values were the Pfizer values. So they were holding Pfizer up, you know,
corporate values.
Corporate values, and there was a little bit of pushback on that, not surprisingly, because Pfizer are up for fraud. They've been. I mean, how long have we got? We could go for that and say, well, they've tried to mislead people on their clinical trials. They you know, obfuscated on releasing the data. They tried to get it held back for 75 years. They've been coercive in their contracts. There's a really good clip out of an Indian media group. You get that. So there's a lot of data there to show that their values are in fact highly suspect. It's a little bit like Twitter, right? Hold yourself out as holier than thou, but in fact you're not so good. But here's this church group holding up the book of Pfizer, which I think is just after Leviticus, not sure, I need to check, chapters 5 to 11, and saying to people their values that we as a church group maybe could, you know, learn something from. I mean, that's synchronicity. To me, it's like just
and it's kind of tragic because
I mean, it doesn't.
Well, actually, it's totally tragic because
It's
the
tragic with a
church,
capital T.
the church has such a valuable source of values grounded in an absolute to bring to the world and to actually
Why not talk about those?
make it better? And so to have it flowing the other way, and that's I think you're right. The link between dualism and synchronicity in the context we're using it, because dualism is saying you've got two different lives. Don't you dare let your religious life filter into your civic life. And synchronicity is saying, well, hang on, we're watching it go the other way. Well, the moment you have civic values that are separate from your religion, you must contaminate it. You can't have two selves.
They're importing the values. It's to stay. I think what it is a way, if you think it through, it's like, how do we deal with this dilemma that we're in, this contradiction? And we say, oh, I know what we'll do is we'll adapt some of those values, adopt some of those values, and we'll be more acceptable, right? And therefore we won't have such conflicts with people. We'll actually mirror who they are. We'll try and kind of represent some of their values, and then they'll like us. Well, I got news for you. They won't like you, and it's not going to play well.
Yeah, I think dualism and syncretism, they do give you two perspectives that are two sides of the same coin, are definitely linked. Dualism is trying to say, look, you've got your religious life and your civic life, and don't you dare let one interact with the other.
Totally separate,
Keep them separate, non-overlapping magisteria. And then you've got syncretism, however, is the fact that when you do try and hold two selves, one of them it'll start flowing the other way. You can't have two sets of values within yourself. You've got one set, and it's all the different ways in which things that are dominant in our culture will begin to contaminate the church. Permeate. And it's, of course, at the level of the individual that you start upholding them as high values, and then, of course, within the church. And whenever I think in a church context, you hear about cultural engagement, the importance of cultural awareness and meeting people where they're at. Often, however, that lets in this little point that says we're upholding things that actually don't have authority.
It's yes, and absolutely, and it's a way, I think, of the church movement of trying to be more relevant, more acceptable to a contemporary culture. It's this whole seeker-sensitive thing. But dualism is that separate stuff, and syncretism is like saying, well, we'll take some of your spice and flavour into us, but it's almost like a compromise. It's a contradiction, actually. It's a contradiction because either you are who you are, and you know who you are, and you're taking that as a solution, or you're saying, well, actually, no, I'm not that confident in that anymore. I've copped a lot of grief from you guys, from Twitter and whatever. So we'll actually import some of your stuff. We'll read from the Book of Pfizer, chapters 5 to 11, and we'll actually uphold these values as worthwhile, and in that way maybe we're more acceptable, maybe we're more relevant,
maybe we're more palatable,
maybe more palatable,
less judgmental,
and maybe you'll like us, but they won't. The culture doesn't, and what we need now is strong values, strong ethics, absolutes,
and one of those values is truth.
So what is truth, and who will stand for it? So that's really kind of a good place to end on this little session on contradictions, because the world, the globe around us is full of them, from media to government to the church, and we really need to stand on what we believe and what we believe to be true, and what we believe is a solution for the world. Because right now, with World Health and other things like that happening, we're in dangerous times. So thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next time.